Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to Stones and Bones, episode number 12. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, we're going to talk about one of our favorite cemeteries. This is probably in our top 5, Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta.
Yeah, definitely our top 5.
So gorgeous. I think we were there back in, was it 2021? Or was it 2020?
Feel like it was prior to, that thing that shut the United States down.
Was it before COVID?
I think so.
Okay, so it was before 2020. Just a great place.
There are places for our dead, places of peace and not dread, sites of simple or elaborate stones that memorialize our lost ones' bones. Welcome to Stones and Bones. Whoa, welcome to Stones and Bones. Whoa.
Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta is a magical place. This is not only a garden of the dead, but a garden for the living. For 175 years, Oakland has been a burial place for the deceased of Atlanta, and while it isn't officially an arboretum, there are dozens of varieties of trees and hundreds of flowers. Unique monuments, memorials, and mausoleums dot the landscape that have been carved out with red brick walkways. There are many unique stories here involving tragedy, triumph, murder, and love. Oakland Cemetery is one of our most favorite cemeteries in all of America, and every one of the 48 acres contains a treasure.
We actually covered Oakland Cemetery briefly on one of our haunted cemetery episodes. It's in the 300s. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it's episode 300 and something. And I think it's one that I hosted by myself, even though we had both been there. I don't think you joined as my co-host yet at that point. So this definitely would have been probably 2019. Tammy and Brian were there with us, and we gave it a little bit of a coverage, but not as deep as we're going to get into with this episode. Oakland Cemetery is located in the heart of downtown Atlanta and greets visitors with a simple red brick entrance. It doesn't have anything real grand, but my gosh, when you get inside, I've never seen a place, Kelly, that has these red brick walkways. Usually, there's either maybe concrete, but most of the time or maybe a little bit of pavement. A lot of the times there's
Gravel
not
road.
major, this is a walkway right here.
It's
between
beautiful.
Different things. The cemetery was founded in 1850 as Atlanta Cemetery after the city outgrew its downtown municipal cemetery. Atlanta was nowhere near the huge metropolis that it is today, with only around 2,500 residents. Can you imagine Atlanta like that? Oh my gosh. Its name came from the feminine form of Atlantic, which was the name of the railway that terminated here. And that name, Atlanta, sure beat its former name because when the railway came there and terminated there, it was called Terminus.
Oh.
What city do you live in? Terminus?
Yeah, I like Atlanta better.
Yeah, so Atlanta's much better. And the reason why is because the railway that came through there had Atlantic in the name, so that's where they got that from. With this new cemetery being proposed, city planners decided to follow the trend in other cities to move the founding of cemeteries outside the city limits. We've talked about this when the Victorian Garden cemeteries got started. They wanted to keep the disease out of the city, so they moved them to a further area. Plus, you could really stretch out and make it more like a park. The original grounds were just 6 acres of farmland that was purchased from the Wooding family. Alfred Wooding had one stipulation. He wanted to move his wife, Agnes, here, and so he did, making her the first internment. Now, I've also heard that the 6 acres that Alfred sold already contained Agnes's plot. So it's like the family cemetery's here. So I don't know which of those stories is true. Either way, he clearly stipulated Agnes is going to be buried here, and she was the first body there. She had passed in 1850, and the couple had shared 7 children. Even though he remarried, When he died in 1878, he was buried next to Agnes here in Oakland Cemetery. Dr. James Nyson would be the second burial when he died in Atlanta in 1850 while attending a physicians' conference. He was afraid of being buried alive, Kelly, so he requested that there be a doctor there at his burial to cut his jugular vein to make sure he was dead. So let's hope he really was dead, because otherwise the doctor just killed him. But I'm like, wow, that is a fear of being buried alive.
I'll go with the whole ringing the bell and attached to
Yeah,
the
yeah.
string kind of thing. Thank you very much.
I
Okay.
think I'd like that better because you're afraid of being buried alive. So, yes, nobody wants that. But if you're alive, you also don't want to be killed.
Yeah, I don't know. Kind of a conundrum there. The cemetery would officially become Oakland Cemetery in 1872, and land was bought through the years until the grounds reached 48 acres. The cemetery would quickly become the most beautiful spot in the city, and it was Atlanta's first park. Elements of Victorian styling would be installed, such as cast iron benches. Families would come in their carriages to share picnics. There are 70,000 people buried here, and while burials are closed, exceptions are made for some people important to Atlanta. There are a variety of sections to explore, including the North and South Public Grounds, East Hill, Confederate Burial Grounds, Bell Tower Ridge, Hog Pen Corner, Greenhouse Valley, Fair Street Square, Potter's Field, African American Grounds, Lion Square, Ladies Memorial Section, Jewish Flat and Jewish Hill, Rogers Hill, and of course, the original 6 acres. That's a
So,
lot.
yeah, that's the way they're all mapped out when you see a map, too. So it's a big cemetery and there's
is.
so much to see. Even when we were there, I don't think we came close to covering it.
Yeah, we barely touched it, I feel like.
So, the Bell Tower Ridge is the highest part of the cemetery, and it gets that name because it features the bell tower. And this is probably the coolest structure in the cemetery. It's Romanesque in style and was built in 1899. The first floor originally had a chapel and office for the sexton with living quarters for the sexton on the second floor. The watch house was built in 1901 and is the office for the cemetery security team. Before the bell tower was here, there was a 2-story farmhouse. This served as headquarters for Confederate Commander John B. Hood during the Battle of Atlanta in 1864. So keep in mind that's what's happened here at the cemetery before that. The battle was fought to the east of the cemetery. The first greenhouse in Atlanta was also here in the cemetery and is still located here, but in a different form. The original was built in the 1870s, then replaced in the early 1900s. Because of neglect, much of it was removed in the 1970s, but the brick walls remain, and the new greenhouse was donated in 2015. Renovations were undertaken on the bell tower in 2022, so it looks even better than when we saw it, Kelly.
Indeed.
And it has a great store in there, and I got a book there.
Of
and
course.
It's got some cool
Always
stuff.
got to add to the library.
Yes.
Buried on the ridge is the first mayor of Atlanta, who was Moses W. Formwalt. He was a self made man making his fortune in the tin and copper business. Much of the copper was made into stills, and he was against prohibition, of course. So, when he ran for mayor, he ran against an opponent that was a law and order and pro prohibition candidate. He won and served for 1 year. He later became deputy sheriff, and in 1852, he was stabbed to death by an inmate he was escorting from council chambers. For some reason, he was placed in an unmarked grave. In 1907, he was moved to a better plot and given a marker near the bell tower.
The African American section is a reminder of a time when even segregation affected cemeteries. It was in 1852 that the Atlanta City Council ruled that slaves were to be buried on the eastern extremity of the property apart from the public burial grounds. This area was nicknamed Slave Square. Isn't that a fabulous name? Wow. This was not a coveted section of the cemetery, obviously, and was set on lower ground that tended to flood and disinter coffins.
That's terrible.
So, wow, here, have the garbage area. There are believed to be 800 unmarked graves here, and there is an effort to do restoration of the graves, and they're trying to improve the ground because it's still kind of that way. So they have a lot of issues with the water in that area. As the cemetery expanded, the graves of many African Americans were exhumed and moved, and eventually this became known as the Black Section and then the African American grounds. There is one mausoleum here that belongs to educator and realtor Antoine Graves. He was principal of Gate City Colored Public School when Jefferson Davis's memorial procession came through town and all schools were required to close. Graves, of course, refused to do that as he didn't want to support Davis in any way, and who could blame him? He was fired for this and then went into real estate where he did very well. So it's kind of like, ha
See
ha,
ya.
I'll show you. Some other prominent Blacks are Bishop Wesley John Gaines, who founded Morris Brown College, Reverend Frank
Corals.
the founder of the Atlanta Baptist Female Seminary, which was the precursor to Spelman College, Dr. Blanche Beatrice Saunders Thompson, who was one of Georgia's first African American female doctors, and Carrie Steele Logan, who founded the first orphanage for African Americans in Atlanta and was known as the Mother of Orphans. There was also Augustus Thompson, who was born to a free man and an enslaved mother. His mother was willed to a family member in Georgia, and that's how he ended up here in Atlanta. His father couldn't join them from Mississippi, or he would have been enslaved again. So he was only free in the state of Mississippi. So his whole family, because they were property, they were willed to another family member in Georgia. So he was separated from his family. And if he wanted to be with them, he would have to be a slave.
That's terrible.
Yeah. Augustus learned the trade of blacksmith and he became very skilled, never lacking for work, especially during the Civil War. His tombstone features an anvil atop it, and there are the familiar 3 chain links of the Oddfellows above his name. As he not only belonged to the group, he was a co-founder of the lodge in Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
Ransom Montgomery was a hero who saved a train full of passengers on the Western and Atlantic line after a bridge caught fire. The state gave him his freedom, sort of. So they're like, thanks for being a hero. We're going to kind of make you free. What they did is he was given to the railway line. So that meant that the state actually owned him, but he was given land, and this made him only the second Black in the state to own land. And then he was also allowed to serve refreshments to train passengers, and he was paid as well by the railway. So, he was kind of owned by them, but he also had things that other Black people did not. So another prominent Black is Maynard Holbrook Jackson Jr., who was the first African American mayor of Atlanta. He was elected in 1974. He's not buried in the African American section, but rather the North Public Grounds, and his marker is facing the Atlanta skyline, which is what he'd asked for because he had watched over it as mayor, so he wanted to watch over it in his death as well.
Nice. The original 6 acres is just that and has some of the oldest burials, but there are some that stretched into the next century. Carrie Berry Crumley was born in 1854, and when the siege of Atlanta happened during the Civil War, Carrie was 10. She kept a journal, and this journal is still used today by historians to get the perspective of a child's view of the Civil War.
That would have been very interesting.
Yes. She died in 1921 and was buried here in the original 6 acres. The Jewish Flat and Jewish Hill make up the Jewish grounds and were established in 1860 and in 1878, respectively. This was meant for the old German Jewish community and then later Russian immigrants. The dense placement of grave markers was in keeping with the Russian Jewish tradition, and so this prevented any formal walkways or aisles.
So they don't get any of the red brick walkways.
The Russian headstones have Hebrew, while the German ones use English. The Potter's Field is believed to have 7,500 unmarked graves that contain both whites and blacks. Some coffins have been revealed to be rather expensive, so not everyone buried here was indigent.
Makes you wonder, how did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
Were they with
Absolutely.
family or something? I don't know. That's just weird. Or maybe they spent all whatever money they had on the coffin.
Could be.
Margaret Mitchell Marsh is buried here with a headstone she shares with her husband. There are box elders at the corners of her plot with rose bushes. Mitchell was born in 1900 and wrote the novel, obviously Gone with the Wind, for which she earned a Pulitzer Prize. A film of the same name was made in 1939 featuring Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh. If you haven't seen it, you really must. The story is an epic historical romance featuring the love story of Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara. Clark Gable was set for the part from the very beginning, but it took 1,400 women being interviewed before Lee was selected to play Scarlett. On August 11th, 1949, Margaret and her husband John were crossing the intersection of Peachtree and 13th, heading to see a movie. A drunk driver struck Margaret, and she was rushed to the hospital, where she died 5 days later. The driver was an off-duty taxi driver, and after receiving a citation for drunk driving, he served 11 months in prison for manslaughter. Mitchell was 48 years old. Dr. Mead in Gone with the Wind is thought to have been based on Dr. Noel Pierre P. D'Alvigny, who was known as Atlanta's doctor. Dr. D'Alvigny was born in France and immigrated to Atlanta in 1848. He actually is the one who slit James Nison's throat at his graveside. So I'm like, wow, that's great. So he was the one who was called in to get that jugular. He saved Atlanta Medical College from being burned by General Sherman by pulling a fast one on the Federal soldiers. The doctor got the hospital attendants drunk and had them crawl into the hospital beds and pretend to be patients. I don't know if it's because they were like throwing up or just flopping around so much that people are like, something really has to be wrong with them. They moaned and groaned when a Union officer walked through to see if the hospital was empty. The officer said the doctor had until the next day to evacuate the hospital, but the troops pulled out the next morning, so the hospital wasn't burned. Boy, was that lucky. I don't know what he would have done if they didn't do that. The doctor later was performing an autopsy, and he nicked himself while he was doing that. He didn't clean the wound until after he finished, and it became infected, and he was soon in critical condition. He did recover, and he did live until 1877. You got to be careful when you're cutting up those dead bodies.
Oh boy. There are great memorials and statues here. One of the most amazing memorials was for the unknown Confederate soldier and featured a lion known as the Lion of Atlanta. The Atlanta Ladies Memorial Association erected this in 1894 and was inspired by Switzerland's Lion of Lucerne. The lion was mortally wounded by a broken spear and was clutching the Confederate battle flag. This was removed in 2021 after suffering a lot of vandalism.
It's beautiful. It was very moving. I'm glad we got to see it before it was removed. Let me just say, I'm glad that they removed it if they were trying to protect it. And I don't know where it is now. I would hope it's on display somewhere else. When you remove history, you take away from remembering things. And I'm kind of torn on this because there are a lot of Confederate soldiers that were fighting for a lot of different reasons. Because I'm telling you, the rich people weren't sending their sons to die to keep their slaves, and the poor guys weren't going to keep the rich guys slaves. So there were lots of reasons why people were fighting in this war. And so it was a very moving memorial to have for the unknown Confederate dead that didn't have any names. So I am kind of bummed that it's gone. Hopefully it'll be able to come back someday as long as it can be respected.
Another Confederate monument is an obelisk made from Stone Mountain granite that was dedicated on General E. Lee's funeral day in 1870. It stands 65 feet tall and was the tallest structure in Atlanta at the time. We found a unique seashell that it turns out was not so unique. These memorials were sold in the Sears and Roebuck Company catalog and featured an infant sleeping inside of a seashell, and they were used to mark children's graves. The seashell symbolizes resurrection and baptism.
Yeah, we thought, oh, wow, this is so unique. And then we realized, no, it was in a catalog. So there's a lot of them out there, I guess.
Apparently.
There is the Great Locomotive Chase Marker, which documents this moment in history that took place on April 12th, 1862. What happened is that a group of Union raiders stole a Confederate locomotive and took it all the way north to Chattanooga with hopes of destroying the railroad lines. There was a chaotic pursuit. There is the granite carriage step that is the last of its kind in Oakland and was used back in the days of picnics for women to get out of carriages. Another remnant from that time is a hitching post for horses that is found on the eastern boundary of the original 6 acres. The Neal Monument was created in the 1890s in the neoclassical style and has many symbols on it. There is a woman holding an open book and a closed book indicating a completed life. There is a palm branch for spiritual victory over death, a laurel wreath indicating eternity, and a Celtic cross for eternal life and faith. We loved the Out in the Rain fountain that features two children standing under an umbrella with the fountain spraying down over them like rain. It was made from cast iron by the J.L. Mott Ironworks Company of New York. The gray plot features a statue of Niobe, who was a woman that had 14 children, and she bragged to the goddess Leto about those children. Leto was the mother of twins Artemis and Apollo, and they murdered all of Niobe's children. Thus, the statue is a symbol of grief. I guess she shouldn't have bragged about her children. I don't know what she's trying to say. Well, you only had twins and I had 14. It's like, yikes.
The mausoleums here are amazing, both elaborate and large. There is the eclectic Elsis Mausoleum in the Jewish section that is the final resting place for Jacob Elsis. Elsis immigrated from Germany to Ohio in the 1840s and used $1 that a fellow traveler on the boat gave him to get to Cincinnati. He was skilled in cotton goods, and after the Civil War, he moved to Georgia and opened a store. He moved to Atlanta in 1869 and worked as a rag dealer and junk trader. Jacob then got into manufacturing and started Elsis May and Company, which became the Southern Bag Factory and finally the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mills. Those mills became one of the largest textile manufacturers in the world. Jacob established Cabbagetown as a mill town, and he filled it with shotgun-style homes for his workers, who were mainly Scottish and Irish, which is probably how the town got its name.
I've heard stories that it smelled like cabbage, and that's why they called it that.
The back window of the mausoleum overlooked the mills so that Jacob could keep an eye on his business. He was a philanthropic man who was known for his big heart and good treatment of his employees. He also helped set up a pay ward at the local hospital to make treatment affordable for the working class.
The Jacobs Mausoleum is done in the Beaux Arts classical style and was built in the 1890s and is located in the Jewish section. We have Dr. Joseph Jacobs to thank for Coca-Cola because his downtown pharmacy was the first to serve the soft drink in 1886.
Wow.
That's why Atlanta is the home of Coca-Cola. The Coca-Cola formula was concocted by pharmacist John Pemberton, who had studied under an herbalist. Pemberton was looking for pain relief from Civil War wounds he had received, and he used a coca leaf that contained cocaine and mixed that with cola nut extract. The liquid seemed to calm nerves and to stop headaches. Pemberton brought the liquid to Jacobs' pharmacy to have him test the product. Now, for people who don't know, pharmacies were really cool in the day. They didn't just have medicines, they had a soda shop. So there was a soda shop here in the pharmacy, and you've got your, what did they call the guy who took care of the soda fountain?
Pop. No, I don't know.
No, gosh, what was he called? Like the fountain guy.
Soda
but-
jerk.
Yes, it was
Soda
a soda jerk. Thank you. So you've got your soda jerk here, and legend claims that he accidentally used carbonated water rather than ice water to mix the drink. The men tried it and loved it, and Jacob started selling it for 5 cents a glass. Sadly, neither Pemberton or Jacobs got rich off the product. Pemberton died penniless. The guy created Coca-Cola, and he died penniless. Jacobs, though, died in 1929, a rich man because he had owned 16 successful drugstores in Atlanta. So he had a whole chain of them. So he did okay, but can you imagine the guy who created Coca-Cola? No money.
The Rawson Mausoleum is located near the bell tower and is eclectic in style and was built in 1880. This is the final resting place of local merchant William Rawson. Rawson's son-in-law, who also had been an Atlanta mayor, Charles Collier, Collier's daughter, Julia Harris, and her husband, Julian Harris.
Can you imagine Julia married Julian? What are the chances?
J&J. Julian's father was Joel Chandler Harris, who wrote Uncle Remus. Julia and Julian had owned the Columbus Enquirer-Sun newspaper. They won the 1926 Pulitzer Prize on behalf of the paper. The Harrises lost their 2 sons at the ages of 3 and 4, a year apart. Those were their only children, and they are buried in the mausoleum, too.
The Grant Mausoleum catches the eye because it looks like it has a pyramid atop it. It contains the remains of Governor John Marshall Slayton and Sarah Frances Grant Slayton. Sarah had come from a wealthy and prominent family in the city of Atlanta. Her first marriage brought the most impressive wedding Atlanta had ever seen in 1891. Sarah had married a man from another prominent family, and they rushed off on their honeymoon. Everything seemed wonderful until her husband, Thomas Cobb Jackson, put a bullet in his head outside his father's home 15 months after they married. He had gotten caught up in a scandal called the Lewis Redwine and Gate City Bank foreclosure. We're not sure what all it was about, but a case analysis summary said the Fidelity and Casualty Company issued a bond to the Gate City National Bank to cover losses from the fraud or dishonesty of Lewis Redwine, a receiving teller. As assistant cashier, Redwine engaged in dishonest conduct that caused the bank to suffer losses exceeding the bond amount. Redwine was later appointed assistant cashier. The bank's cashier may have had knowledge of Redwine's misconduct, but did not inform the Fidelity and Casualty Company. So it sounds to me like he embezzled a bunch of money, probably. So Thomas Cobb Jackson and his father had an office in the bank building and had driven to his father's house together. And after his father got out of the car, that's when Thomas killed himself. Something had to have happened there. I don't know if they had a discussion at the office about what was going on here. Thomas was very good friends with Lewis Redwine. So I don't know if money got exchanged there or what happened there. But for somebody to take their own life, especially right after your dad gets out of the car, something was going on there. As for Sarah, she went on to better things and remarried to John Marshall Slayton, who eventually became governor of Georgia, and she then became First Lady. And now she gets to spend the rest of her eternity in this grand mausoleum. The Jasper Newton Smith Mausoleum is neat, and we spotted it almost immediately upon entering the cemetery, and we made our way over quickly because we'd never seen a mausoleum with a statue of someone sitting outside of it. And not only is he outside of it, Kelly, where is he at?
He's on the roof.
He's on the roof. So we're like, okay, we got to go over there first. What is happening here? The mausoleum is eclectic in style, and as you've heard, a lot of the stuff in this cemetery is eclectic in style, and it was built in 1906. Jasper was a real estate entrepreneur, and he ran a brickyard after the Civil War. He wanted to face the entrance of the cemetery so he could watch all the comings and goings, and he's been nicknamed Oakland's unofficial mayor. So he's the mayor of the cemetery, basically.
Like Mrs. Kravitz got to see who's coming and going. What are they doing over there?
Now, Jasper is featured in full Victorian clothing, including the beaver top hat. But there is one thing that is missing, Kelly. What is that?
I actually can't remember.
He's missing a tie.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It's like, who wears a full suit without a tie? That would be Jasper. Because apparently he abhorred ties as he was almost strangled to death as a child.
I forgot about
So
that.
he had like a fear of these ties. The mausoleum was completed before Jasper passed, and he took to visiting his final resting space many times before he passed in 1918. So I don't know if it's morbid or if it's just like, hey, I just want to kind of get to know the place.
Seeing the handiwork in terms of how he had it designed. The Calhoun Mausoleum was built in 1910 in the Greek Revival style with the customary columns at the front and is the final resting place of Atlanta's first eye, ear, and nose doctor, who performed the first cataract surgery in the city. The stained glass window is really cool, featuring Jesus healing a blind man and a woman and man awaiting healing and pointing to their ear and throat, respectively. An inscription from Luke 17:19 reads, "Go thy way, thy faith hath made thee whole." Calhoun told a friend, "Never in all my practice have I failed to give attention to a patient because he did not have the dollar."
So he took care of everybody who came to him. It didn't matter if you could pay or not. The Austell Mausoleum is located in the original 6 acres and is probably the fanciest mausoleum in the cemetery and was the most expensive when it was built in 1883 in the Gothic Revival style. So isn't it amazing? It's in the original 6 acres. This Gothic structure is magnificent. Alfred Austell was a merchant and investor, and he was one of the country's largest cotton dealers. Members of the Thornton and Kennedy family are also buried in this mausoleum.
Tragedy is no stranger in a cemetery. Many markers reveal these tragedies, like August Danks, which reads, lost at sea when the steamship city of Athens was sunk off the Delaware coast. Dank was a German who worked for the aforementioned Jacob Elsis at his cotton mill. He was sent to New York for company business, and because his health wasn't great, the doctor told him to take a ship rather than the train. As he came home aboard the city of Athens, a French cruiser called La Guerre collided with Dank's ship, and the city of Athens sank in 7 minutes, killing 67 of the 125 passengers. Dank was one of them.
So his doctor was worried about his health. Don't get on a train, get on the boat. And that turned out really well. I want to read the story about Sarah Dye. This is in the historic Oakland Cemetery of Atlanta, Speaking Stones, which was written by Kathy J. Kamerlin. And we did go into the bookshop there. This is what I picked up there. In July of 1864, Atlanta was bombarded with shells from the Confederate and Union armies. It was the middle of the Atlanta campaign, and both sides were fighting for possession of the gate city of the South. The campaign would continue for another month before General John Bell Hood and the rebel forces pulled out, and General William T. Sherman and the Union forces pulled in. Sarah Dye was alone with 4 children in their home on the corner of Baker and Ivy Streets. It was built by her husband Thomas, said to be the best carpenter and framer in Atlanta. Now Thomas was off to war, even though he was reluctant to do so. Sarah and the children dug a bomb-proof shelter in the side of the hill of the backyard and settled in, hoping to survive the daily shelling. Can you imagine? She dug that out with her children.
It's amazing.
Her nearly 2-year-old son, John Morgan, named for the Confederate raider from Kentucky, took sick around that time when the Battle of Atlanta was going on. That was July 20th, 1864. She carried Johnny off to get help for him, leaving the 4-year-old Joseph Edward and the 9-year-old James Buchanan in the care of 12-year-old Miranda. Can you imagine you have to leave the rest of your children there? Sarah came upon a Union doctor who gave her some medicine for the sick child. She asked how she should measure out the medicine when it was so dark in their dugout. He taught her the trick of pouring the medicine into a spoon, placing her finger in the spoon, and when the liquid reached a certain place on her finger, she'd know it was the right amount. Right amount or not, John died, and Sarah needed to bury him. She had already lost 2 children before the war who were buried in the family plot at Oakland. She did what she had to do. She found a box to place John in and carried him off to Oakland Cemetery. While on her way, she encountered an unidentified black man pulling a dray. He asked where she was going. She replied and he answered, "Lady, you got no business being alone to bury a child and being by yourself on the streets." So he helped her, taking them all to Oakland, helping her dig the grave and bury the boy. As he was traveling in the opposite direction, he could not take her back home. Spent and weary, Sarah fell asleep on her small child's grave. When she awoke, she started back for home, trying to avoid the red fireballs, relying on the strength a woman can muster for the sake of her family. According to the Southern Claims papers issued after the war to help reimburse Southerners for their wartime losses, Sarah was a Union woman and against the war from start to finish. She had made it public that she thought the war would bring no good. She was labeled a Union sympathizer even though her husband served in the Confederate Army. Apparently, he was conscripted, forced to join, and often went AWOL. When General Sherman gave the orders that Atlanta was to be evacuated, Sarah had 3 choices: stay and find work, go south, or sign the oath of allegiance and go north. Those who signed the oath would receive food and assistance from the Union. She went north, at least to Cincinnati, and then to Alabama, where she had relatives. Finally, she returned to Atlanta the summer after the war's end. When she returned home, she found the house destroyed along with the outer buildings. There was only an empty lot and part of a fence post. Her husband Thomas came home after the war and built a new house. They eventually sold this one and moved to another one on Marietta Street. She had 3 more children after the war.
Wow.
She died in 1888 of cancer, and Thomas died in 1890 from a fall off a ladder. And, of course, they're buried there in Oakland. And this is a 14-grave lot. It's full of family members and one outsider. Of course, it has that baby that she buried there, and obviously in an unmarked grave. But I just thought that was a great story about what this mother went through to try to take care of her baby. And then when he passes away, she wanted to make sure that he was buried with the rest of the family, even though all these bombs are going off everywhere. And she meets that black man on the street who's like, "Are you crazy? What are you doing?"
And then there are the stories of murder. Captain Charles Wallace had been a Confederate officer, and he moved to Warrenton, Georgia after the war. He became the editor of a local paper and wanted to join the local Freemason Lodge. A doctor named G.W. Darden said he would support Wallace's application, but when the time came, the doctor blackballed Wallace, which infuriated the captain. Wallace took to his paper and denounced the doctor as a liar and a scoundrel. That pissed Dr. Darden off, and he decided to settle the matter with a gun on March 12th, 1869.
But I mean, he was the jerk. He's like, oh, yeah, I'll help you to get into the Freemasons, and then stabs him in the back. And then when this guy says, man, he's a scoundrel in his paper, he's like, I'll just kill him.
I just thought it was funny that you wrote it as that pissed him off. Anywho, he waited from a second-story window for Wallace to pass by, and he fired multiple shots from a double-barreled shotgun, killing Wallace. The doctor was apprehended quickly. Some local men decided to get justice and broke into the jail and took Dr. Darden out into a field and shot him.
Yep. So they said, okay, well, we'll get justice here. When it comes to the Hill brothers, there is a murder and a suicide. Bob and Tony Hill had been exceptionally close brothers growing up, and both were very successful men. Their shared problem was with alcohol, and this led the brothers to fight often. There were signs that they were heading for a tragic end. They shared an apartment on the second floor of the Lovejoy building. Below them was a vacant saloon that shuttered due to prohibition. This didn't keep the brothers from drinking, and signs of their brawling in their apartment entailed broken items and bullet holes in bookcases.
Oh my.
To the outside world, they seemed to get along and played music together. The main reason for their fighting, Kelly, what is it always?
Was it a girl?
It was a girl. Her name was Kate Pickney. November 26, 1886, Bob had arrived home very intoxicated and he went to sleep. Tony arrived home later that day and he told a friend before going up to the apartment that he wanted to go up and straighten Bob out. A neighbor named Mamie Johnson heard 4 or 5 shots later, and she opened her door and yelled to another neighbor that those Hill brothers were shooting at each other again. So apparently it was a common occurrence. There was a final shot and a body falling heavily to the floor. She recalled that Tony had told her that, quote, something will happen to Bob or to me. One of these days we'll get drunk and kill each other. See if we don't. Bob had killed Tony and turned the gun on himself. He was still alive when the door was finally unlocked, but expired as he was lifted to the bed. They are in unmarked graves beside the Wade Hill Mausoleum. That is a unique mausoleum as it is the only one in the cemetery made of brick. I've never seen a mausoleum made of brick. So, very, very unique. The Inman family plot is amazing with its symbolism. Edward and Samuel Inman were cotton merchants. Samuel was known as Atlanta's first citizen, and he also worked as a banker and was a civic leader. This family had to move from being a part of the planter class before the Civil War to holding interest in railroads and mechanized ways of dealing with cotton. They moved on to streetcars and banking. There are faces of the Inman children here modeled from their actual death masks. Hugh is depicted as a boy cherub flying above rocks and lifting a mantle from a casket, symbolizing a life built on a firm foundation with a triumph over the mystery of death. And Louise is depicted as a female cherub resting against a tree and recording life on a tablet symbolizing premature death. The Rich family plot holds the bodies of brothers Morris and Emmanuel Rich, who came to Atlanta from Hungary and founded Rich's Department Store, which was sold to Federated Department Stores in 1976. In 1994, this company bought out Macy's, but Rich's and Macy's both continued to run, but because they overlapped each other, had similar offerings and prices, Macy's was the name that came out on top in 2005. Rich's Department Store was famous for its return anything policy. I guess they're like Walmart.
Underwear?
Yeah. Ugh. So this actual Rich's Department Store became Macy's. So they were both separate entities, and Macy's just kind of overtook it, I guess you could say. And finally, there are some pets buried in the cemetery. One of these is Tweet the Mockingbird. A lamb graces his tombstone because the sculptor could not make a mockingbird.
Oh.
And then also from the book, there is the story about Jip. For 14 years, Herman Benjamin and his dog Jip, a rat terrier that could pass for a lap dog, were inseparable. When Herman went to his downtown drugstore, Benjamin and Kronheim's, Jip went with him. when Herman traveled by train to Ocala, Florida, Kelly.
Oh,
That's where we got
I
our
was just
camper
there today.
to visit relatives. Jip went with him, traveling in a special pet carrier Herman handmade out of an old suitcase with ventilation holes cut in. Herman always said he'd just as soon put himself in the baggage car as have Jip separated from him.
Oh.
He lavished attention on his dog as if he were his own son. Herman Benjamin was born in Prussia back in 1863, and he was the youngest of 8 children. His parents, fearing rising prejudice against Jews by the government and military conscription, packed up their children and sent them off to America to live a better life. Herman became a druggist and after moving to Atlanta worked for Joseph Jacobs Pharmacy in 1885 and 1886, and so he was no doubt working there when the first Coca-Cola drink was served up, probably. In 1887, Herman started his own drugstore and later married Ruby Steinheimer. They had one child, a daughter, in 1906 who, according to her marker at Oakland, lived only a few days.
Oh.
And then Jip came into Herman's life in 1917. The very intelligent Jip was Herman's beloved companion and friend for the next 14 years. Jip died 2.5 years before Herman died in the winter of 1931. Herman's death notice in the Atlanta Journal on August 24th, 1933, proclaims that Herman had Jip embalmed after his death and put in a special casket of copper. Jip's remains were to be left at the mortuary until his master's death, as Herman wanted to be buried with and beside Jip. On August 22nd, 1933, while standing in front of his drugstore, Herman suffered a fatal heart attack. He was 70 years old. The journal article goes on to say the 2 caskets were interred side by side. Jip's dates were listed as February 20th, 1917 to February 7th, 1931, and Herman's were listed as August 1st, 1863 to August 22nd, 1933. And Herman wrote an inscription for Jip on his casket that read, "Jip, my companion friend, true, unfalteringly loyal, pathetically lovingly, I will continue to show the sincerity of my love and care for you, even in death till my end, and then ever after too, sharing with you the eternal sleep beneath the same sod." So that's the official story. Family members have a different story.
Oh.
So here's the problem. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but there's a lot of cemeteries that don't allow animals to be buried in them, so you can't have your pet buried with you. That was the case here at Oakland. You were not allowed to have a pet buried with you. So the family goes into the mortuary, and they're going to make some funeral arrangements. Julian, who was the nephew, knew what the wishes were, that he wanted to be buried with Jip. So they're going in to make these arrangements. And he's talking to the mortician there, and the mortician tells him, "I'm sorry, that's against the law to bury an animal, even in a human casket." So they were like, "Well, can we put him in the casket if we can't put him in the ground?" But then the mortician goes on, "But I tell you, I've got some business to do in the front office, and here's your uncle's coffin, and here's the little dog's remains that I've been storing for him. I'll be gone about 10 minutes.
Aww.
So I thought that was very cool that the mortician was like, "We'll make sure that gets taken care of. I just don't know anything. Don't tell me. I'm just going to leave for a couple minutes here."
I didn't see anything.
So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, very sweet. Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta is one of those really special cemeteries here in America. There is so much history, so much symbolism, and so much beauty. This should be on everyone's must-see list. And that's just a little about the stones and bones here.
Such a great place. If you've not been, you really have to make a trip
It's
there.
beautiful.
It's so amazing. I just love it. We're very thankful to you guys for joining us on This Stones and Bones. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
Stones and bones. Bones, bones.
That's why Coca-Cola is the home of Atlanta. I mean,
You mean Atlanta is the home of
Yeah.
Coca-Cola? Julia and Julian had owned the Columbus Enquirer Sun newspaper.
there you got it, Kelly.
Lord. Julia and Julian had owned the Columbus Enquirer Sun newspaper.
All right, one more time.
Golly.
Ding, ding, ding.
Cut
Take
it
5.
out.
102.